Hi class, I decided to get in touch with you through this video lecture because I realized that you may wanting to find out a little more information on what the quiz is going to be about versus just asking you to read from chapters 3 and 4. So I'm going to be giving you a few cues as to what you're supposed to be responsible for before you get to the second quiz. The quiz is worth 25 points and it's going to be opening up this week on I believe on Thursday. So you've seen the announcement. I will post a reminder with when it's due and with the timing that is available. Some of the items that you need to be aware about, that you need to be reading and studying about, are because the chapter is about language and the way we use it. One of the concepts that the chapter talks about is bypassing, and bypassing has to do with how whenever you were speaking to somebody and you're giving a message, but whatever the person ended up with is very different from what you started out with. So that if you I know that a comment that I often make in my class when I teach on my face-to-face is that to make this point anyway, is that I'm not a very religious person, and so then I have to make sure that uh, students know that I'm actually a very spiritual person. It's just what I meant to say by I'm not very religious is that I don't believe that in order for someone to believe in a greater force, in a greater being, like if you believe in God or in any greater being that you happen to believe or worship, that I don't believe that people need to go to a temple and worship at a specific day during a specific time. You can be very kind to people and you can be nice to people and you can reflect on your own, and you can, even if you're the kind of person that says prayers or practice any religious spiritual rituals, then you can still do that at home. That's what I believe anyway. But so my point to you is that if I were to say I'm not a very religious person, then what would you assume? That I never go to church, that I don't belong in any kind of religion, or what would you believe? So then bypassing means that there's a difference between what I say and what you receive, and it's bound to be misinterpreted. Therefore, I have to make sure that there's no bypassing. I mean, the word bypassing by itself, it means that there's a disconnection between what you say and what is received. So in order to avoid that, you have to be careful that you're not going to bypassing. There is also the concept of denotative and connotative. Denotative has to do with the meaning of the dictionary, or what a dictionary would say the word means, versus connotative, which means the assumption of what we believe that the word means. When you hear the word gay, what does that mean? If you were to look it up in a dictionary, the word gay means happy. And yet when you use the word gay by itself, and it can be interpreted or and it can be associated with so many different descriptions, then what do you assume? What does it mean to you? Versus the dictionary says this is what gay is, which, by the way, so the word gay means happy, right? That you're happy. So but then people assume all these things, right? So it's important that that you know the distinction between what the dictionary says and what we assume when what the word is when we speak. There's also concrete versus abstract words. And concrete words are words that you can feel with any of your senses, and they're words that you can that you can that you don't have any questions about what you're talking about. If I use the word freedom, the word freedom is actually an abstract word because it can be open for interpretation. What do I mean by freedom? Do I believe that we're free in this country? Do I believe that? And then if you believe that you're free in this country, then what does it mean to you? Versus if I say, well, I don't believe that we're free in this country because even though we have freedom of expression, I believe that we are taxed so heavily that we're bound by the government. If you were to believe that, I'm just using that as an example. Versus if you had traveled to other countries and you believe that they're quite a bit more free than we are in the United States. And so again, not my personal um, opinion here. I'm just trying to use examples to help you see what someone might see as being a concrete or abstract. If you are, if you're talking about, say, sports or activities, or track and field, or javelin, or long jump, which one of those are is most concrete? Okay, so if you are saying long jump is a very specific event that you're making a reference to, versus if you say sports, then what does that mean? That's that word is an abstract, and if you want a concrete word, then you will go for, say, long jump. What about words are culture bound? So it turns out that even when we use the same language, in different countries, such as in England or Australia, in the United States, in Canada, we all speak English, but we have different meanings to different words, and so words can be culture bound. That happens in Spanish. If Spanish is not the same in Mexico as it is in Spain, as it is in Argentina, as it is in Ecuador. The language is based on, is part of the culture, so it's going to be quite a bit different, even if you speak the same language with another from another country, right? What about the word culture? Culture is any beliefs, attitudes, such as religion, your views for politics, your way of life, any traditions that you practice, and these are passed down from one generation to the next. The word culture actually comes from the Latin root agriculture, and it means to cultivate. But so if you look at the description of the book, it's going to give you a slightly different description, but that's basically what it means. Everything that you're about, that you're passing down from one generation to the next. Make sure that you look at that description of the book. What about when we speak and we use gender neutral language? That means that we are not making generalizations, such as when if you say policeman or mailman or policeman versus police officer, or firefighter versus fireman. It's about avoiding a specific language that can be basically sexist in a way, right? We believe that we need to be careful in the way that we speak to other people, and we need to be neutral and not sexist, in terms that you're not saying the policeman or the fireman or the mailman. We need to avoid those terms. Or even when you do use those, when you're writing an essay, you say his and hers rather than everything is just his, right? What about polarization? Polarization is when you're using language that is on the extreme, such as when you were to say either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. There's no in between. You're telling people that they're on the extreme. You cannot be a little bit of anything, right? When you're using polarization, for example, Martin Luther King was very good at using polarization, and he was actually very good at getting people to agree, the majority of people, to do what he wanted them to do. But so, of course, Martin Luther King was an exception. When we speak, it's best when you're not polarizing, being on one extreme or the other. Sometimes you might have even heard people who say, well, nobody likes the United States right now because we're playing police to the world. Well, that's not a fair statement, because that's, number one, not true, and number two, polarizing, it's being on the extreme, is not the right thing to do. You always want to be somewhat neutral and not going to one extreme or the other. What about nonverbal communication, and what constitutes nonverbal communication? That is any kind of message that is other than spoken, such as the number one way that we communicate is through our face and the eyes. In fact, it is believed that 93% of the way we communicate is through nonverbal communication. That is a figure of speech. I know that we communicate through language, and that I realize that, but in trying to make a point as to how important nonverbal communication is, we oftentimes say that, or actually not oftentimes, but researchers have shown that nonverbal communication is so important in the way we communicate that 93% of the way we communicate is through nonverbal. And nonverbal communication actually includes the accent that you use when you communicate, or the effort that you put into your voice, besides just say mimicking or body movements or the image that you give out through the way that you dress or the way that you look. Our face by itself conveys the majority of the way that we communicate through nonverbal communication. What nonverbal communication is actually believed to be more believable than verbal communication, because you have heard before how there's a figure of speech that people use that actions speak louder than words, because we believe when people demonstrate to us that what they're saying is true. Kinesics is an area of nonverbal communication, and kinesics is basically the study of human movement and gestures. 5 different types of kinesics are to complement, to contradict, to repeat, to substitute, and to accent the way that we speak. When you're complimenting, that's when you, for example, see flight attendants mimicking in an airplane so there are 6 exits in this airplane, and they're pointing at him. Or you have to put the oxygen mask, and they are basically complimenting what they're saying. When you contradict, that's